Revolt of 1857 saw the end of the East India Company's rule in India. If I have to divide the modern history of India, from 1600 to 1857, the Indian subcontinent was ruled by a trading company called the East India Company. After 1857 till 1947, the Indian subcontinent came under the direct rule of the British Crown. In other words, the British government and its parliament transferred the control of British India and its princely states from the mercantile East India Company to the British Crown. We also refer to this period as the actual British Raj. There is another reason why 1857 is regarded as an important year in the history of the Indian subcontinent. It is because of the Revolt of 1857. Now let me give you the summary of what led to the 1857 revolt. I'll briefly give you an overview, otherwise this will be a never-ending video. There were multiple reasons behind it. The British East India Company started interfering with India's political, social, religious and financial systems. If you look at the period 1757 to 1800, the British East India Company gradually increased its political and military activities. They had established themselves as one of the major political and military powers by defeating many Mughal and Maratha rulers. Basically, they snatched authority one by one from Muslim and Maratha rulers. They had gained enough confidence in the Indian subcontinent to establish its authority. That's how by the end of 18th century, the British felt very strong and pursued an aggressive policy of territorial expansion. And then after 1800, the British introduced the idea of paramountcy and created laws and institutions which simply meant that the authority and position of the East India Company was supreme in Indian subcontinent. The company introduced many regulations that made many Indians upset with the company's rule. Many Indians saw it as an exploitation of the Indian culture. Some of the laws that made the Indians upset were abolition of sati in 1829, introduction of English education in 1835, spreading of Christianity through missionaries in many rural areas, then doctrine of lapse 1848. The idea behind this was to annex those states which have no successor. Their ruling rights were lapsed. Even in the case of adoption. Due to this law, many princely states like Jhansi, Satara, Udaipur, Jaipur, Sambhalpur, Nagpur, etc. became the victims of this policy. Apart from it, the doctrine of lapse was also designed by the British to take away the titles and pensions of the rulers of some states. Now this led to great resentment amongst the rulers. The rulers of these kingdoms thus rose in revolt against the company. Then the British also changed the Hindu law of property by passing the Religious Disabilities Act of 1850. As per this law, it allowed Hindus who converted from Hindu religion to another religion to inherit their ancestral property. Now this law caused a lot of chaos because it was seen as an incentive to give up one's own faith. Then Hindu Widow Remarriage Act of 1856 was passed. Then again in 1856, General Service Enlistment Act was passed. As per this law, the Indian soldiers were required to serve in area away from their homes without any extra allowances, which is called bhatta. It was a taboo for Brahmins in those days to cross the seas. It was known as Samudra Alangana. Even this situation became part of the revolt. Then Indian soldiers were paid low salaries as compared to Britishers of the same rank. Although Indian soldiers outnumbered the British soldiers, but they could not rise above the rank of Subedar and were also racially insulted. The British policy of economically exploiting India also became one of the causes of the revolt. This hurt all sections of the society. Peasants suffered due to high revenue demands and district revenue collection policy. And finally, on 26th February 1857, the 19th Bengal Native Infantry Regiment showed resentment over the new Enfield rifles. You all know the story of the Enfield rifle. Indian soldiers were given the Enfield rifle. The cartridge of the rifle was greased with fat of cow and pig, and that was against their religious faith. They were forced to chew the cartridges during training. Hindu as well as Muslim soldiers took it as a great insult to their religion. Mangal Pandey was the central character of this story. He shot the first bullet at the British. And the last point is when the mutiny started, the Indian troops went to the last Mughal emperor for becoming their leader. The British disrespected the last Mughal emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, and that hurt the sentiments of Indians, especially Muslims who had great respect for him. So together all of this became the main causes for the uprising of 1857 revolt. On 10th May 1857, in the town of Meerut, A mutiny erupted among the Indian troops of the East India Company's army. Next day, that is on 11th May 1857, early morning, the Indian troops reached Delhi and asked Bahadur Shah Zafar to lead them. Here are the names of the Indian leaders who are associated with the revolt of 1857. Although the mutiny began in Meerut, but it spread rapidly to other places like Delhi, Agra, Kanpur, Bareilly, Gwalior, Jhansi and Lucknow. Basically all over present-day Haryana, Bihar, the central provinces and the United Provinces, which is Uttar Pradesh. Now this mutiny, or you can say rebellion, was a severe threat to the British power because nothing of this magnitude ever happened before. But then the British controlled it in Gwalior on 28th June 1858. That means this revolt went on for 1 to 1.5 years. Now I need to give you the reasons also why the British were able to control the revolt and defeat the rebels. The first reason is that the sepoys who revolted did not have one clear leader. As you saw the list, there were many of them. If you have so many leaders, it's difficult to formulate one single plan. They did not have a proper plan. So overall there was a lack of leadership. That's the first reason. And secondly, there were many princely states who supported the British side by providing soldiers as backup. In other words, our own people, many of them, supported the British in fighting and suppressing the rebellions. There were 21 princely states. Here are the names of the princely states that supported the British during the 1857 revolt. Again, the British had told them many stories or gave them many deals to keep them on their side. It is said that many of these princely states were not happy with the fact that the rebels or the Indian troops or sepoys went to Bahadur Shah Zafar for guidance. Many of these princely states saw this revolt from a different lens. They saw it as a restoration attempt of Mughal rule in North India because they had been persecuted heavily by the Mughal dynasty before the British arrived. Anyhow, the revolt of 1857 continued for 1.5 years. And it forced the British government to rethink and replan its ruling policies in India. That is how on August 2nd, 1858, the British Parliament passed the Government of India Act 1858. Under this act, the East India Company was formally dissolved and its ruling powers over British territories in India came to an end and were transferred to the British Crown. In other words, from here on, the era of the new British Raj started.